All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Defense at Hyperscale Technologies and Policies for a Defensible Cyberspace here in Southeast GH. Speaking with us today is Jason Healey. He's Senior Research Scholar, Cyber Conflict Studies at Columbia University. Just a couple of housekeeping tips for you. Stop by the business hall today. It's located in B-Side A and B. Black Hat Arsenal is on in the Palm Foyer, Level 3. And, of course, we've got the Arsenal reception today at 5 p.m. If you haven't picked up any merchandise, last chance today to visit the Swag and Bookstore. Visit the Kali Linux Lab in Mandalay Bay A. And if you would, put your phones on silent and welcome Jason.
Good morning. One, really happy to see so many people here. My name is Jay Healey. I teach at Columbia University and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. I love seeing there's so many folks here. One, because it's so damn early in the morning, and second, because I was a little embarrassed when I actually saw the name of this talk, and I was like, oh my God, I included 3 buzzwords with a black hat audience. I said cyberspace and defensible and hyperscale. And so I spent about the first 5 minutes of this kind of like apologizing for using so many buzzwords for a black hat audience. It was right after RSA when I did this. I'm sorry, it happens. So I've been coming to Black Hat for a bunch of years. And I really hope that in future years we do it the same time as the PET conference. Because it is really fantastic. I'm trying to figure out how to get like urine off into my presentation. I can't do it. But it's great to hang out with those folks because it's so fun. They're like, yeah, were you at that Purina event last night? Yeah, right, woof, woof. It is. So I really hope, we got to talk to the Black Hat crowd because it's just fantastic. So it's also great to see everyone here because this is a very policy talk. I haven't been a practitioner for a lot of years now. I'm much more on that policy side of things. And so here's what we'll be talking about today in this very policy-focused talk. So again, sorry about the buzzwords in the title. Forget I used words like hyperspace and defensible will come up with in cyberspace. Really, this is a talk about defense asymmetry. And defense asymmetry has come up a lot while we're here, about trying to give the defender more advantages. In this room yesterday, Mudge and Sarah Zatko talked about what they've been doing in the cyber independent testing labs. And what we're trying to do with this with my talk, is trying to put a little more structure around that when we talk about asymmetry of defense and what we can do about it. And not just on the technology side, but adding in the operations and policy to broaden that idea out. And so it's really struck me that we don't necessarily have a central strategy, a central doctrine that pushes us. We've got some things that stand in for that, but it's really struck me we don't have something that really unifies us between technology, operations, and policy. And that's, for me, the things like where defensible gets me at, is this asymmetry of defense and knitting all this way through. And here's what I mean, like when we talk about strategy, so I spent a lot of time in DC, and so the most successful national security strategy we've had as a country was a single word: containment. And whether you're Democrat or Republican, you might have disagreed about how to get about containment of the Soviet Union, but everyone agreed on that central strategy. And so what's our strategy? What's that one word or a couple words that we can all say, all right, this is what we want to try and get to, and this is what feeds all of our actions. And to me, it's these ideas of defensible that we'll be talking about here. And so really the way I talk about it is I want to get defense better than offense. That'll come up. And what I like about that, it scales. It can work for you as your enterprise within a particular sector like the DIB or the finance sector. For a country of saying we want to make the United States cyberspace or internet more defensible. And you can say it for the internet as a whole. And as I'll talk about in this talk, to me, as we've looked, the solutions that do that best give both scale and advantage. And we'll talk about what we mean for scale and advantage. Just to throw in one more buzzword, but for me it's about being sustainable, right? We want our kids and our grandkids and their grandkids to have an internet that's at least as awesome as the one that we have today, right? And when we look at a lot of the trends, we're a pessimistic bunch, right? I'm not sure that many of us think the trends are going the right way. that that's necessarily going to be the case, that the internet's going to be as free, as awesome, as secure 10, 20, 100 years from now as it is today. And so that's really what motivates me when I try and come up with this overall strategy. So this quote is going to sound very familiar to so many of you. I mean, if you've done any red teaming, I'm sure we've heard this time and time again here. Few, if any, contemporary computer security controls have prevented a dedicated red team. So I did one of the things that I edited the first history book of cyber conflict. And this was my favorite quote from doing that history book. Right? This sounds very familiar for us. We all know this. Unfortunately, and so for me, I took this and I said, all right, this is true because offense is easier than defense. The attacker has an easier time, right? It's attacker asymmetry, attacker advantage. I use this O is greater than D to help represent that. I'm saying that offense has the easier time, the attacker has the advantage. So far, so common, we know that at Black Hat. But what really struck me about this quote is from 1979. So before probably most of us were in the business, before some of you were probably born. So for 35 years, over 35 years, we've been attacker advantage. The attackers had an easier time. And so for over 35 years. So what the hell have we been doing for 35 years, right? All of those evenings that you didn't go home for dinner, all of those weekends where we got stuck at the office dealing with some kind of worm, all those missed baseball games, plays, all that time we could have been doing something else. All of those tens of billions of dollars we've been spending, all of the patents, all of the hard work that we've been doing, all the DEF CONs, all the Black Hats, all the RSAs. All of that, I don't want to say it has been for nothing, but for all of that work we've put in, and we haven't changed this fundamental fact of our business, that the attacker has the advantage, for over 35 years. So what have we learned during our time here at Black Hat that's fundamentally going to change this relationship, to change attacker advantage? So you can see why I zoom into this as the fundamental thing. We've got to change this. How long can a system stay where one side has an advantage year after year, decade after decade, and you don't hit a tipping point? So to me, it's fundamentally about this attacker advantage. So the asymmetry of offense. So I kind of simplify this down to saying, I'll usually say $1, but really I mean an hour or some measure spent on attack buys far more than $1 spent on defense. And you can see where I'm starting to zoom in on where I think the main problems are going to be. So I won't spend too long on this slide of why is it the attacker advantage. We all generally know this. You've probably been hearing this a bunch. You know, the internet was never really designed for security. It was designed for connectivity, software weaknesses, attacker initiative. We've got to defend everywhere. They just have to get right once. And you notice a lot of these quotes, right? A lot of these quotes are more than 10 years old. So it's not like I'm giving you any news. It's not like we haven't known this for a long time. It's just that I don't think we've gone about trying to solve these problems in the right way. We misaim our solutions. I love this quote from Phil, who I used to work for. Need more secure products, not more security products. Also, we're just continue to add complexity. I mean, we're starting to get so many systems layered on top of systems that no one can really understand this. One of my buddies, Bill Woodcock, put it as, we can't keep modeling an infinite series of monsters under the bed. And so as it starts getting more and more complex, we can't understand it, makes it more difficult to defend, and of course, troublesome humans. So we all understand that problem. So let's get into what I think we need to do about it. So for me, if the problem is that offense has an easier time than defense, then the strategy has to be as equally clear that we need to get that defense better than offense. I spoke at Black Hat 2 years ago a little bit about this. I was calling it saving the internet or saving cyberspace. And so that's what I want to get. I wanted to get the D larger than O, or even better, D, way better than O. Double crocodiles, like you teach your kid, but is that even possible? A lot of folks I talk to would say, that can't even happen. We can't even get to that place to think that we can get the internet as a whole, cyberspace as a whole, to be defense advantage. And that I thought that was a little bit too bad that I was having these DC policymakers say that. Because, right, if you don't think you're ever going to be able to get it better, then you might as well keep doing, then there's no reason to limit your own offense. But, so this part of the work is at Columbia University. We've been putting together a New York Cyber Task Force. A lot of folks from New York in it, a lot of the banks. My dean is co-chair along with Greg Rattray at JP Morgan Chase, as well as Phil Venables at Goldman Sachs. But it's a nice mix of academics and practitioners from New York, DC, a few other places, to try and take on these three questions. What do we mean by defensible? Why hasn't it been defensible to date? We just talked about that. What have we done in the past that's had both scale and advantage? And then based on that, what should we do next? The idea, so defensible, we've made up these things. Agile, instrumented, measurable. We should be able to know things more easily than we can in our current environment. Multi-stakeholder collaborative. It's not dominated by governments. It's easy for us to discuss. Well-governed. I'm a little shaky on the word policed here. I don't mean policed in the sense of, whoop, whoop, like police coming in, but that it ties in with the next point, few externalities. Right now, so much of our problems are someone can force their security problems onto us. Someone somewhere else on the internet doesn't take care of their security situation, and then we have to deal with that because of, for example, DDoS, and of course, resilient. So where we really came at this, and where I think is the central part of this briefing, where I want to spend the most time, is what have we done in the past that's made the biggest difference? And you'll see why I think that's important. About 2 years ago, the Economist magazine came out with a piece on climate change. And this is from that article, where they said, all right, what interventions have we done that have taken the most carbon dioxide equivalent tons out of the environment? And you can say they did this ranking of them. And I bring this up for two reasons. One, there was a real kind of a surprise. Anyone even heard of that top one of the Montreal Protocol? That was the CFCs, taking out the chlorofluorocarbons. And what they did in the article was they also talked about how expensive these were. So we spent a lot of money, for example, on nuclear power and hydropower. I mean, that's a lot of money that got spent on those. And yet both of those added together was less than what we did to take CFCs out of the air. So one, it was kind of surprising that, when you look at this. But what really struck me was that the Economist said, as far as we can tell, no one has ever asked what interventions we've made the biggest difference at least cost. So here it is. I mean, climate change. And this is meant to be a big deal, right? This huge public policy issue, supposedly. And yet no one had looked at it and said, what have we done that's made the biggest difference at least cost? And man, the light bulb just went over my head and said, for our business, what have we done that has made the biggest difference at the largest scale at the least cost? Either within enterprise or for the internet or cyberspace as a whole. And so I started this process about 2 years ago to start asking folks to say, what do you think that we have done at the most scale and least cost? And we really came into a couple ideas that really underlay this. So one, and I'm going to go through this list of technologies, operational solutions, and policy. I'll go through that next and what the answers so far have been. What the answers they had both advantage and scale. So by advantage, it is $1 of defense has to buy more than $1 of attack, just to start with. Some don't, like compliance. We spend $1 or an hour, whatever unit, on compliance, right? It doesn't cost the attacker an hour or $1 to bypass that. It probably costs them like $0.2 to bypass our compliance. So we've got to flip this around with our solutions. But it's not just enough, because there's way more of them than us. So it can't just be we spend $1 and it costs them $2 or $3 to bypass it. It's got to be, it has to have scale. If we spend X, it has to cost them 10X, 1,000X, even 1,000,000X. I'm not kidding. Our solutions need to be 1,000,000X here. And here's where we say hyperscale, and I promised the speaker liaison folks that I had to say hyperscale. So see if you can tell the guys I said that. And so I mean it literally 1,000,000X is what we've got to aim for in our kinds of solutions. And if we're not getting 1,000,000X, we need to start thinking about how we can innovate to get them to that amount. So what was the worst as we talked about this? I've already talked about compliance. I don't think I have to convince you that compliance isn't a 1,000,000X payoff, right? But we also looked at the policy side. And if people know the Wassenaar Agreement, this was arms export. It was an arms export treaty of trying to make sure that we weren't getting weapons into the wrong hands. And over the last couple of years, governments have been trying to apply it to our area. And it's just been a disaster. It's been awful. Jeff Moss got really involved. He was able to kind of get a lot of the community together to work against it. And to show what I mean about how this was so bad because it didn't bring scalar advantage, I was talking with one of the large computer security companies. We had an event at the Atlanta Council so we could talk about it. We had the Commerce Department and the State Department and the security researchers and cybersecurity companies. And one of the big vendors said, right now, we have 10 export licenses that we need for our company for us to deal with these issues. If the Wassenaar Agreement went through the way it was supposed to, they stopped counting at needing 1,000 export licenses. They just said, forget it, we're done. And if you think that would have stopped the attackers anywhere near as much as it would have stopped one of these big cybersecurity vendors from having to ask for 1,000 export licenses. And so the kind of thing that this would have limited, and fortunately it did get stopped, was if you were Symantec, say, and you had some future Stuxnet, and your team was looking at it in the US, and you want to do a follow the clock on it and pass it to your team in Asia, you're now passing a munition, and so you need an export license, even though it's just a security research team that's trying to figure out how to stop this dangerous and potentially deadly attack. You now can't do that unless you had an export license. So again, it got stopped, but that's exactly the opposite of what we're talking about. It doesn't bring scale, it doesn't bring advantage. So here's the top 10 technology. We're still working through this with the New York Cyber Task Force. I'm not sure they actually know I'm giving this talk, so don't tell them. And here's the top 10 that we've come up with so far, and then I'll talk to, we've got, but out here in Vegas, I've started to get some other ideas that have brought in. So automated updates. To me, this is the classic example of 1,000,000X. Because I'm not saying it was cheap for Microsoft to roll this out in '98 when they did, and not just Windows Update, but all automated updates. But I'm sure it wasn't cheap or easy for them to do this. But think of the amazing payout that we've gotten for that. I bet it is at least 1,000,000X of that we've gotten from that initial investment that you put in to make sure that systems are easily patched. To me, this is one of the best examples of 1,000,000X. Oh, and so where there's a quote that's usually but not always a quote that we had gathered as part of this project, and if there's and it's always, the quote is always associated with the first name listed. Cloud-based architecture. I was really, really surprised. Again, not having been a practitioner for a couple of years, I was really surprised how much two of the key people in our task force, Phil Venables and Ed Amoroso, pushed cloud. And Ed, I thought, put it great of so many of our problems are because we are built on a crappy architecture that is insecurable. It is indefensible. because the architecture is just bad from the foundation all the way up. And so that's so many of our problems as security professionals is trying to build as best as we can on this incredibly shaky and insecure foundation. And so what people like Ed push is, when he was at AT&T, is saying, now we can build this from a secure foundation on the correct architecture based on the cloud, and we can do it the entire way while letting the CIO think we're doing it for him just to save costs. So we can do it to save cost, but we can also build a secure architecture on the way up. I was very, very surprised in how supportive Ed and Phil were on this. But then I started to think about a lot of my formative moments were when back in the age of the great worms, we're getting by NIMDA, SQL Slammer, and the rest. And you think about whenever we would get hit with one of those, or if you have an intrusion now, right? You've got to detect it. You've got to go. You've got to reprovision a computer to that person, grab that computer, bring it back to the lab. It kind of sits there until the tech can get to it. He'll take it, he'll re-image it, clean it up, and then we're ready to reprovision it back out to someone. Now that we've got virtualization, containerization, right? There's no physical computer that you've got to worry about. If it gets owned, you can just take it down and reinstantiate for the person. And now, instead of the attacker having to do this much work and the defender having to do this much, it becomes much more even. Okay, encryption, another one of those clear million-X payoffs. My colleague at Columbia University, Steve Bellevin, really pushes hard on this, right? Encryption is about the only place where natively the defender has the advantage over the attacker if implemented correctly. Steve always puts in parentheses. It's one of the few places, the largest place, where natively, organically, the defense has the advantage over the attacker. And that's why Steve is so vigorous in expressing to the government, please don't mess with encryption, right? This is the one thing that we've got that works, the one tool that actually works. So let's not start messing with it. Secure default configurations. I got this from a DHS official that really enjoyed this one, and I like it because again, it's not one of these big ideas like automated updates, but it's one of those things that does bring scale advantage, makes things significantly easier if done correctly. I added Kerberos together with authentication beyond passwords that Bruce Schneier brought up, and here you imagine things like how much more secure we were after the introductions of RSA tokens than before, right? Things like RSA tokens moved us into this brand new space where all of a sudden we could be far more secure, and it really scaled up. I'm not saying it was easy to implement Kerberos correctly or to bring out two-factor authentication, but for how much work it cost us, it cost the attackers far more. Mike Aiello, Goldman Sachs, put in mass vulnerability scanning. What could happen once we got Nmap and the products like it. Mark Sachs added in built-in NAT for home routers. How many homes were now safer, or if you're using home routers, because you had NAT and those networks were no longer easily visible to attackers. Really helped when those got rolled out, 10, 15 years ago. And I changed this one up. This had just been ASLR, but I really changed it having heard Mudge and Sarah on the same stage yesterday to broaden out to developer environment security. For ASLR, for heap protection, kernel memory protection, everything that's being done on fortification of software. It's one of those, and if you saw their talk, it was really great on being able to go in and we just know how to do software better, and if you do it correctly with things like this, using the right libraries and the rest, it can make, using more secure commands, what a difference that it can make if you're doing software development correctly. And the last one of the top 10, and again, these might change. Richard Baitlick added in DDoS protection, which I thought was an interesting one. A lot of the other ones are kind of solutions or they're kind of engineering. Richard pointed out, and I think he's right, that if you can pay for DDoS protection, it just puts you in it helps you solve it in a way that so many of other problems can't be so easily solved. I'm not saying it necessarily gives both scale and advantage so that defender is better than attacker, but I thought it was an interesting example. My colleague Bo Woods at Atlantic Council, he's added in a few more. So we just got these last week, so we still haven't really talked about them yet within the New York Cyber Task Force to figure out how we like it. But I really like it. I mean, for example, like language choice controls retirement. Phil Venables had one he threw in retiring legacy systems, and I think those are all interesting. But it's not. So we said, all right, well, so far these gave us scale and advantage. So what can we learn based on these technologies about what might be the next game-changing technologies? I was really surprised to hear about that formal methods are coming back. When I learned about them in a classroom, I figured that they were just something that would always stay in the lab, stay in the classroom, but provably secure, provably no bugs. And this used to be prohibitively expensive, and the cost of this has really come down, where this really might change our business and how we do our business. The Cyber Independent Testing Lab, I love, again, what Mudge and Sarah were talking about yesterday, large-scale consumers report style measurement of how good code is. Security scorecards, things like BitSite. They might not be absolutely correct, but boy, they can really change behavior for not a high cost. Compiler generated software diversity, and of course I had to add security solutions for IoT. If we don't get IoT right, then we are fundamentally screwed for a long time to come. I added cloud deployment because I've had a lot of, as we were talking about this, we had a number of CISOs, and I'll mention Phil Venables again, who just came in and really pushed. It's not just more secure because you can be on a new security architecture, more secure architecture from the ground up. And of course, cloud introduces its own security problems. I'm not trying to say that it's perfect. It of course adds its own security problems. But it really struck me in how some of these CISOs would say, once you get past a critical point where you've got so much compute and memory that's stored in one place, data in one place, it just allows you to transform your security organization. All of a sudden, you can start doing so much more in detection and response that they really think in the next 5 years that this can really transform the way that we do our industry. So as we got this list, we said, all right, what makes these things so special? What is it about these 10, 20 technologies that give them scale and advantage? How can we spot the trends that make these things special? And these were really the five things that we pulled out of that. One, they can take away entire classes of attacks. Dan Kaminsky always talks about this. If we change random this way, if we change this other function, then we can take out race conditions. We can take out entire classes of attacks. And I think that's what we really need to be aiming for. This quote is from Arati Prabhakar, who is the head of DARPA. And that's what they're really trying to do, is just take away entire classes of attacks. Bruce pointed out that a lot of these take the user out of the solution. That the system's patched by default, and the user doesn't have to do anything. The system is encrypted by default, or the communications are encrypted, and the user doesn't have to take any kind of specific action. Jeff brought up those responsible make a change that helps all their users. And he was bringing this up, especially from Microsoft and automated updates. But I think you can see it in a lot of places where a particular vendor takes an action. It doesn't necessarily cost them a lot, but then we all get to benefit because of it. Rather than to solve this on 1 billion endpoints, you go to the folks that can really fix the problem and keep it solved. Phil likes to talk about improving security by decreasing the cost of control. And you can see that in my example earlier about the containerization virtualization, right? It costs almost nothing now to bring up a new instantiation if it's been owned. And Art brought up agility detection and resilience. Okay. But it's not just about technology. We've spent more time on the technology because it's a little bit easier to get our heads around it. It's a little bit easier to measure and imagine what the game-changing solutions are. But they're not the only ones. And thanks for your patience as we go through this. I'll try and come up with another pet joke here if I can. In the 1980s, someone had to innovate and come up with the idea of the first computer emergency response team. It was after the Morris worm, and they didn't have an organization that was responsible for figuring out what vulnerabilities were out there, trying to get them patched, and that would be in charge after the incident started. We had to invent it. We had to innovate and say, let's create this. DARPA, DoD, said, good, we'll create one of these at Carnegie Mellon. And now look, right, everyone has to have a cert. It was an innovation. And so I'm really curious what the next organizational innovation is going to be, right? So we don't often think about organizational innovation as part of this. We don't often think of process innovation. But that's exactly what Lockheed Martin gave us with the kill chain, right? There's no real technology there the way that we think about technology at Black Hat. They said, here's a new way to think about this, and a new way to structure your defense around this process, around this thought. And just look at all the innovations. I saw a couple of Black Hat talks that were including the kill chain. And so I think it's a fantastic example where you can get scale and advantage from a process innovation rather than technological one. You're starting to see this automated threat sharing. We've got the folks in the FSISAC on our cyber task force, and they've shared, their results of how the old trust model of sharing and trying to get things done by emails would take hours, if not days, and now they're able to get that down within seconds or minutes for automated sharing, information sharing out based on sticks and taxi. I like institutionalized bug bounty programs. I mean, what we've seen both within vendors, like what Katie put together in Microsoft, or groups like HackerOne, Hack the Pentagon, some, I think, really fantastic solutions here for quite low cost. The work of volunteer groups like the Configure Working Group, NSPSec, and others, industry alliances, and Budapest Convention on Cybercrime. Maybe an odd one to bring up in Black Hat, but it made a big difference between governments. There's probably 35 countries that have signed now. And before that, there wasn't harmonization between countries on what was illegal or not. If you remember, which was it, I Love You, that, this Filipino hacker, virus writer that put it together, it wasn't illegal in the Philippines. That's much less likely to happen now. If you sign this treaty, then you say you'll have a 24/7 point of contact. So in case there's a fast-moving cybercrime happening, that nations can contact one another. It's a policy solution, but it really does bring the scale and advantage. A few others that I really, really love, and they're a little bit more recent. International norms, indictments, and sanctions. So I spend my time in the political science world, and I'll tell you, it was easy for a lot of us, both in the political science world as well as within our community here, when the indictment of the 5 PLA officers came out. I think pretty much it meant with universal scoffing. Oh, good, you're indicting 5 Chinese military officers. That's going to bring down Chinese espionage. And it turns out it did. It looks like it did. Threat of sanctions last year, leading up to President Obama and President Xi agreeing to no commercial espionage. It looks like it really did make a significant difference, despite all of our predictions that it wouldn't. This came out from FireEye only about a month ago. And you can see that it first started to come down. That first big drop was around the time of the PLA indictments. That second big drop, what really came down, was in the run-up to President Obama and President Xi. This is what was detected. This is only one source. Department of Justice, John Carlin came out and said they saw the same thing. So they did say that, yes, it looks like this is a true trend. And so it's one of those things that really surprised us. What else have we done for so little cost to drop Chinese espionage? Right? If we would have developed a new AV solution and put it out there and led to an over 90% drop in Chinese espionage, we would have been cheering. Look at this fantastic new tool I deployed, boss. I should get a great bonus because we did this. We were able to do this not by having 1,000 companies install a new product, but because diplomats and others went to them and said, and prosecutors went and said, you need to change your behavior. So it really shocked us that this happened, but I think it's one of the most successful things that we've done. Also, the White House has made 2 policy default decisions. And these really matter in policy. If you say, instead of treating this as a balance and we'll do it case by case, you can simplify things if the boss just says, no, here's how we're going to make the decision every time, and it's up to the other side to prove it, to say that we won't make the decision. So there is a U.S. government bias that's been in place strongly since 2014, that when the U.S. government gets their hands on a vulnerability, they will not keep it for law enforcement, war fighting, or espionage, but they'll tell the vendor. It's called the Vulnerabilities Equities Process. I'm speaking about this tomorrow at DEF CON in the morning, opening up track 1. And it's incredible. It looks like, who would have guessed that the government keeps far, far fewer vulnerabilities than we ever would have thought? I would have guessed, and I came out of the military cyber warfare community, mostly defense, but a little bit offense. Most of us thought the government probably keeps hundreds, thousands of vulnerabilities. And last year, it looks like they kept 2. And in my DEF CON talk, we'll examine that, and we'll try and disprove that, and we'll get into more depth. But it's one of those that it looks like public policy made a big difference. Another one of these public policy default decisions that the White House made was a few years ago, saying if we come across information in the U.S. government, either through law enforcement sensitive or signals intelligence, that a U.S. company or U.S. organization had an intrusion, our default position is we are going to tell that company. I used to work at the White House. When we were there, we did not have such a policy. It was, the FBI folks would say, we're not going to tell. Intelligence folks say, we're not going to tell. It would jeopardize sources and methods. Then the bad guys know that we know that they know that we know. They changed that and said, no, defense first, we're going to tell. And you can see this from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report. And now, the number one way that organizations find out they've been owned is being told by law enforcement. And you can see, it might be difficult to see. It's that kind of purpley, periwinkle colored line. I'm sorry, I don't know colors. I'm not a pet guy. That was really lame that you guys laughed at. That was awful. But you can see it went from being nothing to now being the number 1. That's what a successful public policy looks like. Okay, I added this in, Cyber Independent Testing Lab, in being able to test binaries, repeatable manner, and compare. This was the slide from Mudge and Sarah yesterday, in comparing the overall security between major browsers that they've done by looking at the binaries and how much they use ASLR, heap protection, stack guards, and fortified source. All right. Closing it out here. Yeah. And this is so important to me because it's not like the only futures are continued status quo of offense staying better than defense or flipping around to defense being better than offense. It could be far worse, where the attackers don't just have the advantage, they have supremacy. Or we can maybe just imagine flipping that around to have defense supremacy. Not just advantage, but that we really owned them. And anytime they want to do something, it's incredibly difficult for them to try and get us. So when I was at the Atlantic Council, we did some work on this with the Zurich Insurance Group. And we did some modeling with the University of Denver to say, what are the results on global GDP if we get this right or wrong? So we had the best case we called Cyber Shangrila. And in cyber, I was feeling really literary when I did this. So in Cyber Shangrila, we get almost all of the benefits of all the new technologies, right? When you open Wired or Popular American, wherever you see your new text, you open it up and they're so breathless about this new technology that's coming. Smart grid, Internet of Things, whatever. And we get almost all of the benefits out of that because we can secure almost all of those very well. And in that future, we get $30 trillion of added global GDP through 2030. $30 trillion of added benefit. Then we said, well, what if we go the other way and it's attacker supremacy? What happens then? So we call this the clockwork orange internet. And so what we meant by that, what does that look like? In the best future, Cyber Shangrila, secure broadband connectivity is a global right. Pretty much regardless of whatever country you live in, wherever you live in the world, being able to connect and be yourself on the internet in cyberspace is a right that belongs to you as a human being. In the clockwork orange internet, it's a luxury good. And it's only the 1% that can afford to connect securely. Where instead of being, you can be whoever you want online, now it's something that's flaunted like a Louis Vuitton bag. Because every time we try and roll out some new solution, we roll out a new Internet 2.0, it gets taken down by governments, by organized crime, by well-meaning security researchers who bring it down before we've got appropriate solutions in place. And there we saw it down $90 trillion in global GDP through 2030. Stunning amount that we were looking at. If you're interested in that, that report was, it was called Risk Nexus, Overcome by Cyber Risks, where you can just, look for Zurich Insurance or my name. And so there is, how are we doing? So if those are two potential futures, one awesome, one terrible, how are we doing? There are some statistics out there that can help us think about it. The one on the bottom is from the Index of Cybersecurity that Dan Geer has been involved with for a few years, and they look back 5 years. And so what that line shows is they went and asked a bunch of security professionals, are you more worried about the next month than you were about the current month? Do you think next month is going to be worse than the current month? And every month for the last 5 years, it's come back, yes, I'm more worried about next month. If we start getting defensible right, we'll hopefully start to see that edging down. I love the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, because every year they say, how long in days do the bad guys spend getting in? How long once they're in before they get detected, and how long once they get detected until they get kicked out? And you can see the text here from Verizon. It's not going well. There's some sign of improvement, but generally the detection deficit's getting worse. And they're getting faster at compromising us. And that means we're tending towards those worse futures. If we want to get defensible, we should start seeing that come down. Or as we are becoming more defensible, we should see that start coming down. So last slide. So for us to get there. So again, maybe you like the buzzwords, maybe you don't. For more defensible cyberspace, we need both advantage and scale. For me, I like to think of that end goal as a sustainable internet, a sustainable cyberspace, one that's going to be at least as awesome 20 or 50 or 250 years from now as it is today. And to me, that defensibility has got to be that central strategy so that we can find that scale and advantage. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I guess 10? 5. Okay. And we've got, I guess, 7 minutes. So if folks have questions, we can take questions, or I'll catch up with everyone afterwards. Cheers. Oh, and tomorrow, DEF CON talk on vulnerabilities. Okay. Do you want to go to the mic? Oh. Yeah. Oh, wow. Wow. Okay, great. I got a question at the mic here. Go ahead.
Yes. I've got one question. So you were showing the slide where since the agreement between China and the U.S., it's gone down by 90%. But you're still saying that everyone's more worried next month than this month, and attackers are getting faster. So did that have no impact?
I think there's still a lot of doubt on this. Some of it justified of saying, all right, what are other companies seeing? Can we figure out this is definitely the case? And I think a lot still it hasn't quite sank in. I mean, this was only, I don't know, it was probably last month this came out. So.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there are other actors out there that are causing most of the concern.
And I think, if anything, we're probably a lot more worried now about Russia. I mean, I think as people were maybe saying, good, the China thing's come down now we're seeing the Russia thing go up. And not just as far as espionage, but as far as disruption.
Or organized crime.
Right. Well, especially Russia. I mean, especially right now, Russia and the disruptive is, trying to see these hybrid attacks. But it's a good question. Thanks. Yep.
You had a slide on technical solutions that provided the most bang for the buck. That's among solutions that have been implemented. Right. Are you aware of anything in development or something sitting on the shelf that we should push for?
That's why I added this one. We haven't gotten into the. It's the exact question that I'm trying to get to on this, and we haven't gotten into it in a deep way yet in the task force. So these are the ones that we've got so far. Again, if there's anything to me, it's cloud. It's cloud that came through. Trying to do cloud correctly, and then once you get a critical mass, just a lot of your compute and data in one place, and then really being able to jump away from there. So, and just to say, it really gets me, for example, when you see U.S. government trips over themselves of saying, are we saving money? Is cloud the right thing? And what we found overwhelmingly is they're focusing on the wrong issues, and then do cloud as securely as they can, and then they'll get all sorts of great benefits out of it that might not seem right now to the bean counters.
So is the primary benefit there the co-location of the data that allows you to see things as they're coming?
Step one is building on secure architecture. Okay. And again, I'm kind of channeling Ed Amoroso here. So Ed's really the one that's written on this. But starting with the secure architecture, because then you can build up. And then we're starting to hear people say, once you've got that in the right place, then the way that you can do analytics, detection, response becomes a real step change.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. Question on this side? No?
Over here.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to follow up on the first one about your China statistics.
Yep.
One, I run one of the federal government's top 10 data centers, and we have seen zero decline in China attacks. In fact, they increase every day.
Well,
so where does that data come from?
Technically, this is about commercial. The agreement was about not commercial spying, or not spying for commercial purposes. This was FireEye data. So what the numbers were the number of companies compromise conducted. So each of these, I believe, is one company that wasn't compromised. So this is representing like 65 companies per month that didn't get compromised. And so, I mean, to me, U.S. government is your valid intelligence target for the Chinese, just like they're a valid intelligence target for us.
Okay.
So,
one question over here.
Hi.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't even see the mic over there.
I'm short and over here.
Hey,
so
man. Hey, good to see you.
That works out. I liked the argument you made about advantage and scale.
Yep.
How would you value the dollars and time spent, that whatever the unit of measure is, that, let's say, financial sector entities have to spend with the myriad of regulators which are disconnected and have different end states, which is a sizable investment, not just in time, but also in human capital across our organizations. Furthermore, how we make investment decisions based on the fact that we don't want to be victim blamed at the end of the day if we do get breached by the government.
Yeah, a couple blamed by the government if you get breached, not if you get breached by the government.
The litigation seems to favor the attacker.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that's why I take this into different slices. I mean, so one, if I'm talking to someone in an enterprise of saying, what is that you can do to get scale advantage, right? And when people say, all right, I'm going to push education, I'm not sure that education you get 10x or 100x out of it. You can do education in that way. And so one is wherever we can to try and find that scale and advantage. Second is, like I talk about this with the lawyers in the ABA of saying, all right, where can we get this legal innovation so that the law actually inhibits the bad guys more than it inhibits us? And last week, the regulators. Where, when we take this principle in with where can we get regulation that maybe helps free things up? If it's regulation for compliance, it's not helping. I think that fits into this. I actually need to add it. The SEC guidance that said if you have a materially significant breach, it's up to the board to tell the investors. That regulation is like 6 freaking pages. And all it does is say this existing market governance mechanism, it applies here as well. It uses the market structure. It regulates by transparency rather than regulating a security standard. So that's why, to me, it's a strategy, right? It gives me the same tool that I can use for all of these different scales within the enterprise, with the regulators, with the lawyers. So,
and I'm sure members of the Chicago community would be interested in participating as well. So.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, last question, then we got to go.
Yes, I saw in one of your slides you mentioned the impact on the global revenue of government control. Could you explain what you meant by that?
Which one?
With the GDP, it said something. The impact of government control was $30 trillion.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there were 2 other futures I didn't talk about in this one. We had one was the independent internet, and the other was Leviathan. So Leviathan was where we have very, very strong internet borders, where kind of like you see Russia and China now, where if you go online, your online identity and your online experience is dominated by the country where you come in from. And so that was actually that dropped 30 trillion down. We saw in that. The opposite one we called independent internet. So in Leviathan, every time a director Comey says "thou shalt not," he's able to win it almost every time in whatever country. The director Comey of in Russia and China, in Ecuador, in Kenya, the government always wins that. We said in the independent internet, every time the director Comey says "thou shalt not," the techies pretty much are able to outfox them and say, no, it's not going to work this way, we'll invent something. I call that one the full Barlow, for those for the John Perry Barlow. And in that one, that was actually pretty close to the base case. So all right, that's my time. So great, thanks very much, and maybe see you tomorrow at Black Hat.